With inequities and all this argument about green revolution, what is your take? What would you suggest as the best way of countering this, where we have abundance and yet we have inequities?
Well, I mean, in part, at the heart of these inequalities is the institution that modern liberal and certainly neoliberal economics never touches, and that institution is private property. The Green Revolution was premised on the idea that land sales, land couldn't be transferred away from the people who had it. If you were a large landlord and you had a swathe of land, that was yours to keep. And in fact, the Green Revolution was promoted in large part because it allowed land, it postponed and erased the question of land reform. Now, when one thinks of land reform these days, one thinks of Zimbabwe, for example, and the horrors that are there. But bear in mind that, of course, a lot of the East Asian powerhouses of South Korea, of Japan, of Taiwan, they underwent land reforms forcibly. And what happened there was that the US government, in order to make a country more equal and therefore less prone to communism, engaged in land reform in these countries. We can easily trace the success of the East Asian tiger economies to the fact that there was equality in rural areas and therefore poverty was reduced there. And now the awkward point is that, in fact, if you look at Zimbabwe, and it's horrific, and I'm no friend of Robert Mugabe, and I despise tyranny in all its forms. But despite that, if you look at the way that land reform has mattered in Zimbabwe, the results aren't surprising. Before you had a lot of large landholders and a lot of people who were landless. Well, what do you think happens when you give people who are landless land? They do better. And the data that has been coming out of Zimbabwe for a while and has recently been corroborated elsewhere suggests that, in fact, poor people in Zimbabwe are better off as a result of land reform. Now, I wouldn't wish upon anyone the dictatorship of Robert Mugabe. As I say, I think he's a tyrant. But I would like to put back on the table, since we have the evidence for it, the fact that land reform is not a bad way to go in terms of reducing inequality. On top of that, of course, in a world that is increasingly urban rather than rural, land reform in rural areas might be one policy option, but we also need to be thinking about decommodifying food. And again, this isn't a sort of as crazy an idea as it sounds. When Bill Clinton talks about, he was apologizing in the Senate last year, I guess, but for his role in turning Haiti into an incredibly poor country as a result of these liberal policies. When Bill Clinton says, look, we shouldn't treat food like it was television sets. We shouldn't treat food like just another commodity. We ought to allow much more social control over the way that food is produced, the way it's stored, and the way it's distributed. I think that's right. I mean, if you look at, again, hunger in America, 50 million people are going food insecure in the United States, and that's a good thing. I mean, it's not good that 50 million people are going food insecure, but the figure would be much, much higher if it weren't for social programs like food stamps and the entitlement programs that exist in the United States. It's only because, as a result of the stimulus package that was passed around the time of the 2008 and the Great Recession, that people's access to food stamps broadened. And you can chart, in fact, the rise of hunger in America. And had it not been for the food stamps, we'd see many, many more people in the United States going hungry. So 50 million is a very dark victory. But it's a sign that the only way that we combat hunger is by taking the way we access food out of the market and do something slightly different.